oftentimes Christians get a bad rap. People say we're pushy, that we're hypocrites. There's all of these things, and they want to know, why can't you just be real? You know, even in Christian movies or television, everybody's got to get saved at the end, and real life isn't like that. So that's what we're talking about today, authenticity, being real. How do you do that as a Christian? How do you be fully who you are, yet at the same time represent a God who's perfect? That's what we're talking about right now. Welcome to Right Now. I'm Jennifer Shookman. I'm here today with Gavin Adams.
Yes.
And what we're talking about is that whole thing about being authentic and what it means to be real, be who you really are. And as a pastor, I'm sure that's even a bigger deal for you.
Well, it's probably a big deal for all of us in different ways, right? I mean, people know who you are too, so being real, you're on television. Shh, don't, you might not know this, but people know who you are.
I was thinking about this. It's like, how real do I want to be on TV?
Right.
You know, do people really want to know the real me, or do I want to be the TV me?
Really not real sometimes.
Yeah.
I know it is hard because I guess we all have presuppositions of what we think people are like, right, especially if you're on a platform of any. I mean, so I know you say about me being a pastor, but what that means is that I'm standing on a stage, you know, every Sunday morning, and whether, you know, I mean, I'm blessed to lead a larger sized church, but, you know, whether you're leading a church of 50 people in the room or 5,000, everybody is watching you, and they think they know who you are, and they're picking up on stories or even interpreting who they want you to be.
Right. Oh, of course.
And
yes.
And so when
they're projecting.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, maybe for pastors, this is the worst part of it, because I think people do look at pastors as being closer to God. Yeah. And then they think, if you're closer to God, I want you to be a certain way, so that if I ever get that close to God, I'll be that way, right?
So, I mean, just as a simple thing, I remember we went to a Baptist church for a number of years, and my husband went to a football game, and he saw one of the elders there drinking a beer. And that, like, shocked him. He's like, how can an elder in church drink a beer or whatever? And I'm like, you know what? The Bible doesn't say anything. You drink beer, and why is that a problem, you know? But for him, he felt like this person needed to live up to some other standard.
You drink beer, but I'm not an elder, right?
And so that's exactly this problem, though, isn't it? It's where we hold people, especially other Christians, up to a standard or an expectation that may not be realistic and certainly not real. And that's where we get called hypocrites, right? Yeah. Because, you know, my husband, who's having his own beer, is like, he shouldn't drink a beer, he's an elder, you know? Well, who's the hypocrite?
Yeah, I love it when people talk about Christians as being hypocritical. I just say, you should just become one, because there's always room for more. It's like, because the reality, hypocrisy is never going to go away, because we're never going to live up to the perfect Christian lifestyle anyway, right? So the idea that we're hypocritical, well, duh, you caught us. I mean, because we're people. So we're going to be hypocritical. But when it comes to being real about the hypocrisy, I think that's what makes the hypocrisy a problem.
So when you say being real, are you saying like owning it, or what?
Well, just owning the fact that we don't get it right. And so, I mean, hypocrisy isn't a problem, I don't think, when we own it. I think hypocrisy becomes hypocrisy when we don't own it. I mean, hypocrisy is saying you're one thing and when you're really not. Right. So if you're really not, and you say you're really not, it's not hypocritical anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we can get rid of hypocrisy. Solve the whole thing.
But that's the problem, right? It's like, I feel like I need to live up to a standard. I need to be a certain way, because as a Christian, I want people to think this is how Christians live. Unfortunately, I don't live up to that, or I don't live up to that standard in that way. So that's the discrepancy between the two, and that's the problem we have, right? As Christians, how exactly do we solve that? We go from having this ideal standard where we really are, and the fact that we feel like we need to live up to this to make it that way.
Well, I'll tell you, as a pastor, and you brought this up, but as a pastor, I feel the tension, not just because the people who attend our church are watching me and trying to figure out, you know, what I'm really about and if I'm hypocritical or how, you know, but there's this whole lost world that I'm engaged with. That knows, a lot of them know what I do for a living, and they know what my job is. And
that's kind of the key, is that we feel like we have to behave a certain way for those who are lost. So how do we resolve that? What do we do when we feel like we need to be perfect so that others will believe that Jesus can make us perfect? That's what we're talking about, and we want you to stay tuned so we can find out more of this together when we get back from this break. Welcome back. We're talking about being real and being authentic, and why do Christians have such a hard time with it? If you look at people from outside the church and outside the faith, they think we're all hypocrites, and frankly, a lot of times we are. During the break, though, you kind of mentioned a way of sort of looking at that. There's two ways. There's being real and being authentic with other Christians, and there's being real and being authentic with those who are outside the faith.
Right.
I think there's problems with both, but let's kind of hear why you've made that distinction.
Yeah, but can I first share something really deep and dark about myself? I'm just kidding, I'm not. Not yet, maybe one day. So I think the thing, when I think about being real, and maybe this is because of my job, but I think we all as Christians should probably think this way. There's a difference between being real with other Christians, fellow believers, and being real with non-believers. Now that sounds hypocritical to even say that.
It does,
in a way.
yeah.
But I think that, and for me, there's this massive idea, and Jesus taught on this, right? The disciples are all hanging out, and they, I think they had an apple that they were grabbing or something. It was a piece of food, and it had been sacrificed to an idol. And they're like, hey, can we eat this? Right? And the idea was that God created all of it. It's totally fine. You can eat anything you want, unless it causes someone else to stumble. And then you probably shouldn't do it. Not because it's a problem for me, not because it messes us up, but because it may harm someone else. So let's just not make other people stumble.
So this would be a good thing for example, like alcohol. Like,
absolutely. There's
no problem with God. Like, we don't lose our religion if we have a beer.
Right.
On the other hand, there are people who are alcoholics or who have trouble with it, or maybe even have just an idea that Christians shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And so if we get drunk in their presence, then that causes a lot of problems for them.
Right. So how we behave is going to create opportunity or create a detriment for either one of the groups that we're with, right? So take the alcohol one. I mean, this is such an easy example. As a pastor, I have chosen not to drink alcohol. Now, the number one reason I chose not to do it is because if I do, it causes other people to ask questions, and it's just not worth asking the question. Like, and it's not that I think that you can't have wine with your dinner, and it's not that I think that you can't come home from work and have a beer with your pizza. I mean, I think that it's completely okay. Now, anything in moderation is probably okay. Not anything, but most things. And now, outside of moderation, different conversation, okay? I mean, there's clarity biblically with that, right? But having a glass of wine, I mean, come on, not a big deal. But if I do that as a pastor, and I believe it's totally unfair, but I signed up for this, so I'm okay with it, right? If I have a glass of wine out to eat, or if I have a beer with my pizza at the restaurant, if it causes someone else to see me do it, and it raises questions for them that could lead them away from God, lead them away from the church, or even just say, oh, he's a hypocrite, and then they walk away, right? It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. So I actually give up a lot of things that I think are perfectly harmless and okay, because it's not worth causing someone else to stumble. And I think we all do that.
Yeah, so using your example, I actually do something similar, but because of my child, right? So, my husband and I don't mind having a glass of wine with dinner. We've traveled to Italy and been able to experience some different vineyards and things there. I've never been drunk in my life, but to have a glass of wine is not a problem. But my son, who's in college and he's not 21 yet, I feel like I want to set a good example. So I've chosen not to drink around him. I don't drink even one drink probably wouldn't affect my driving or my husband's driving, but we say no. If we're out with any of his friends for dinner, we don't drink, just because we just want to model something else for them than what they're seeing in the situation they're in.
Because that would cause him to stumble.
Well, it
could.
It could.
Absolutely
could. And not even stumble, but for him to go like, well, I want him to see that not everybody does. And so people could look at us and go, well, like, you drink it at home when he's not around. Aren't you a hypocrite? Well, it's actually a very nuanced, thoughtful kind of thing that I'm doing. And I would tell him, if he asked, but it's
Well, I have friends that are pastors that we're a lot of us are friends because it's hard to understand what we do, and it's hard to be friends with just random people. So we have a lot of friends that are pastors. A lot of them will drink wine or beer or whatever at home, in the confines of their home. They would never do it in public, which the general population would go, hypocrite. They go, no. I'm just not wanting others to stumble. And that's a really big idea, because I think this is okay. I think this is God's heart. He cares so much about people, and he is so for people. He wants us to be for them as well. Therefore, I'm going to do everything I can to help them step in his direction, not step away from his direction. And if it's something as silly as drinking wine at home versus in public, if that is going to cause a problem for them, you better believe I'm not going to do it. It's just not worth it.
So how much of what people call hypocrisy in Christians is just Christians choosing not to make their brother stumble?
Yeah.
You know, how much?
I think that's a portion of it.
Okay.
I think there's another portion of it, though, where we pretend to be someone we're not.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is the church I grew up in, where you walked in and you're in the lobby, and you've lived this, right? You walk in and you're in the lobby, and like, how you doing, brother? Great. You know, meanwhile, everything's falling apart.
Right.
But they just got laid off. Their kids are alcoholics, or suffering in rehab. I mean, everything's going wrong, but they're smiling on Sunday morning. You know, that's a huge level of hypocrisy, and I don't know why. Because it's not like God doesn't know. It's like almost like the Adam and Eve thing. It's like, where are you? And they're hiding behind a rock, as if he doesn't know. I don't know why we feel that we can't be real with each other. Now, I get the fact that being real with an outsider can be a little bit more difficult because it could cause them to stumble, back to the idea. Being real with an outsider is a little bit more contentious because they don't fully understand the life of a believer. They haven't agreed for that. They haven't signed up for that. But between those of us that are believers, I think there's something really powerful that can happen when we choose to be authentic and choose to just own our struggle.
Let me just say, sometimes it's hardest to be authentic with other Christians. Our family went through something where, it was a private matter that we were dealing with on our own, but we felt so alone, and we started thinking, like, who can we even talk to about this? And immediately, many of our Christian friends we ruled out because there would be judgment, there would be, they wouldn't understand, there would be blame, there would be, all of these sorts of things that didn't fit exactly what was going on. And so we felt like we sort of had to handle it on our own. We had to do it without talking about it or without doing it. So what do you do in a situation like that?
I can tell you what I would do. I don't know if it's the thing that everybody should do, but I just had a conversation with my daughter recently about a topic that is so similar to this. And she was really upset about something. And I said, are you upset about what's happening, or are you upset about how people are thinking of you?
Right.
And it ultimately was how people were thinking of her.
Right.
And I said, baby, listen, hon, I get it. I mean, I'd be upset if I were you too. I get it. But you can't allow other people's opinions to drive how you're going to live your life and how you're going to behave. And when you are secure in your relationship with God, it should provide a level of security with your relationship with others that really can't be broken. And you can be real because God already knows who you are. And you can be real with, we talk about the vertical and the horizontal relationships. You can be, if you're already honest, you should be with the vertical relationship because he already knows. What's the point of hiding that? But when you can really fully own that, in your relationship with your Heavenly Father, it allows us to create an authenticity horizontally with our peer relationships, our friendships, that I think is a beautiful picture for us of what the relationship with God should look like. But in fact, if I could just real quick side note on this, I think that's why authenticity is so important. Because, being authentic with God is important, but it's hard to tangibly know what that feels like. Because God's mysterious. It isn't like he's sitting in your living room hanging out, eating pizza with you, going, tell me your problems. I mean, he kind of is, but he's not, right? So God says, be authentic with me, and you are, but it still feels mysterious. It still feels ethereal, to use a big churchy word, right? If you think about the horizontal relationships, though, those are very tangible. I mean, they're very real. When you share openly with someone who you can trust, I mean, let's not be crazy, but when you share openly with someone you can trust, I think it paints a beautiful picture of what the relationship with God is actually looking like. I think we learn so much about authenticity. I think being authentic with people, it is incredibly helpful for them because it helps them realize that everybody isn't perfect, that everybody doesn't have their junk together, that we're all messed up, but it helps you too.
Yeah, that's actually why during that situation, it ended up that we were able to talk with some people who weren't members of a church, who didn't have a faith system, and they actually were able to relate because they'd gone through stuff in their own life, and so it actually probably was one of the best, if you want to say, evangelism or witnessing opportunities ever because they saw how I was handling through it. That wasn't why I set out to do it that way, but that was a byproduct of that. But I think part of what happens is that, that those who are in leadership in the church are responsible for this, but also those who worship those who are in leadership
Absolutely.
are responsible for setting these sorts of expectations and things. You know, even something that's...
pastors or anyone.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
exactly. It can give any level of leadership. You know, we're more likely to be mad at the woman who runs the preschool care center if she doesn't smile as we come in than we are the volunteer in the room.
I mean, the only expectation we should probably have is that they're messed up.
Right, that we're all messed up.
I mean, it's like and it's really hard to be frustrated when you don't have expectations, right? But and I know that's kind of like rainbows and unicorns to say we have no expectations, but it is a better way to live. Yeah. But if our expectations can literally be that everybody has junk and everybody's struggling with something and everybody's imperfect, it just at least, you know, creates an even playing field. And our pastors are the exact same as everyone else. Right? Because they're humans just like everyone else, right?
Well, and it's true when people share their weaknesses or share their struggles or share what's going on, we're so attracted to that because we recognize our own struggles in them and we want to see the solutions that they do. When we see people putting on that perfect facade, it's actually very off-putting.
I decided a long time ago that when I became a pastor that I was not going to pretend to be something I wasn't. And so when I preach, I'm very me. And I hope a good version, but
the true version, whether it's good or not.
You know, I did a marriage series. We've talked about this on another show before, but I did a marriage series. I spent a whole day preaching about the worst moment in my marriage. I mean, I did a whole message on the moment I realized that divorce might be a good option. You know, and I used to think that people who got divorced were weak Christians, they didn't have deep faith, if they were true Jesus followers, blah, blah, blah. And then one day I stood in my driveway and thought, oh, I get it. This is why people get divorced. Maybe I will too, because that seems a heck of a lot better than what I'm doing right now. And I preached about that. And the feedback I got from that message, it was really surprising. And you always get feedback.
Right.
Because everybody wants to walk up and go, nice job, you know. And you're like, thank you, you know. Or my favorite one is, you're getting better. And you're like, I don't know what to do with that. But thank you, I guess. It's like a backhanded compliment. But it was like, how bad was I? But that message resonated in a new way with everybody. And it really stuck out to me. And I did it a couple of years ago, but it stuck out to me because the feedback was, wow, I have felt that too. And it hit me, Jennifer, it hit me. I thought, we should all be preaching that way. And even more, we should all just be living that way because God has this amazing ability to use our true, authentic lives to change other people's, to either head them off, intervention, you know, or prevention for them, or to intervene in something that they're struggling with. And I thought, well, why should we ever pretend that we don't struggle? And why should we ever pretend that we have it all together when we know we don't? And actually, most people around us know we don't either. It's like, who are we fooling?
Which is why people say we're hypocrites, right? If we, like you said, if we own our stuff, we say, look, But let me ask you this. Sometimes I feel like I have doubts or I have questions, you know, and I think I'm just really struggling with this, but I feel like I shouldn't say anything because it might cause somebody else to have doubts or struggles. And I know as a pastor, I'm sure the same is even more true of you, that you feel like, wow, I really don't know if I believe that anymore, or I'm really struggling with that.
We joke about that internally a lot, you know, us professional Christians, because, you know, you bump into people with doubt and you go, really, that's your doubt? You're like, my doubts would shatter your faith. Like, you're on like doubt 101. You know, like I'm in graduate school. I'm getting a doctorate in doubt, you know. So I think authenticity is important, but I think being smart is also important.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. You don't want to stand up and go, yeah, I'm not even sure I believe all this junk.
Right. I mean, you know, because people who are, I mean, what was that movie? There's a movie like Liar, Liar or something where the guy just was completely authentic all the time. I'm like, no, that's a little weird too. So I don't know that we're called to walk around and everywhere we go, you know, air dirty laundry and go, hey, let me just tell you how messed up I am, you know, before, you know. I don't think that's the goal. I think as though every time God puts us in a position to be real, we should just be real. Because I think believable Christians are so attractive. I mean, you said that. I think it's so attractive to the non-believing world. And I think we should care a lot more about that than maybe we do. Or even if, and when we do, we should just embrace the fact that when we're authentic and believable, when we're transparent about our life in the right time, in the right season, I mean, not being idiots, but but God leverages that, man, like crazy. And he's done that in me. I've watched him leverage other people's authenticity to change my heart. And now as a pastor, I certainly have watched him do that through me. And that's not why I do it, but watching God leverage my honesty, I think, I don't know that he could have done what he did had I lied or had I pretended to be something I wasn't. So I think it's important.
Well, I think, when I think about the doubts and that kind of thing, I think, again, it would be easy to say that to somebody outside the church. Say it inside the church. They're like, well, you have these positions or you do this thing. How can you have these sorts of doubts? And I think probably what we feel is two things there. One is that we don't want to be judged by other people. We want to be thought we have it all together. And so we don't want to reveal that side of ourselves because of that. The second is because we want to sort of, like help God out. Like say, like God changed me. Yeah. And so I believe it all. It's all great. Everything's, I never have doubts,
Yeah.
But both of them are probably really unhealthy.
Yeah. Well, God doesn't need us to defend him, right?
we think we do, though, or we think like being a better witness is to go, I believe it all.
Yeah,
it's no doubts, no question.
And you should believe it all, too, because I told you.
Yes, right. Yeah. And that's why, right? We want them to believe whatever it is, and so we can't acknowledge our own doubts if we want them to believe it.
Yeah, I loved... I love the thought of that God needs us to defend him as if he like he can't put his own pants on and like he needs us to help. I think there's something
like he's a feeble old man.
Right. Yeah. He's walking on this cane going, please help me across the street. And he's God. So I think though that we are afraid of our doubt, and I think that we're afraid sometimes that if we engage in that. Because, when we talk about being transparent, there's a lot of things we could talk about. Being transparent about your failures, being transparent about your past.
Right.
But being transparent about your current life, the things that you're struggling with, that may be the hardest one.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to be transparent about something that happened 10 years ago that God's leveraged or wants to, and you can see how it could be, than being transparent about, think about marriage. It's probably easier to be transparent about the divorce you had 10 years ago than it is about the pending one you're living in right now.
Yeah, of course.
And so, but I think God can leverage all of that.
Right.
And I think when we become transparent about it, we actually create a context or an environment for him to do something amazing through, if we're willing to engage in that.
Yeah, now your church isn't a big one on doing like altar calls, but there are occasionally times where you say to people, raise your hand or, maybe walk forward or light a candle or do something, an action.
Yeah, moment,
And that takes a little bit of vulnerability for people who are in that situation. But isn't that another area where we're being transparent helps us and maybe helps other people to take a step forward too?
Well, because, and we said this earlier, right? Like there's two sides of it. When we're authentic, it helps us and it helps others. It always does. I think God designed it that way. I'm telling you, when God said confess your sins before others, he didn't say confess your sins before me, because if you don't, right? I grew up literally praying in my bed as a kid, forgive me for, and I went through the list. And at the end, I was like, and anything I forgot? Because I felt like, but God didn't say confess that way. He said confess before others, because that leads them to me. It's a weird thing. It's a beautifully weird thing. So I think when we're able to be authentic about our struggles, our failures, or even our doubts, the things we're not sure about, it changes our heart. I think it helps us understand who God really is and how cool he is with that. I think it helps others go, oh my gosh, I have the same problem. Oh my gosh, I'm struggling through the same thing. And so he's able to redeem both of us through that, but only if we're able to be authentic. Like we have to engage in that.
Right. So
which is a big step.
I'm convinced that I need to do better at that but there's also like wisdom, isn't there? Because like as a pastor, you can't stand up on Sunday morning and say, and pray for my marriage that's falling apart this week.
Right. Let me give you advice on yours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, there is. But I think that, isn't there just a little bit of common sense and wisdom in a lot of this stuff, right?
Of course.
Probably everything we talk about, there's a level of, okay, this is not take it to an extreme. You don't walk into, the professional baseball team stadium and go, hey, I just want everybody to know, hey, can I have a mic real quick? I just want everybody to know my marriage fell apart, That isn't helpful either. Right. I think really for me, it's leveraging authenticity when it leads other people to take a step towards their Heavenly Father. What a beautiful thing to do. Outside of that, I'm not sure, if it's helpful. It's probably unwise. But maybe the worst thing we could do is pretend and hide it when God could leverage it.
Well, and authenticity doesn't mean you have to give all the dirty details either, does it?
So no.
We're going to finish up on this topic right after this break. So come back. We're talking about how do you be authentic and how do you do it in an authentic, real way. Stay tuned. Yeah. We're talking about being real and authentic as Christians, and sometimes that means sharing our doubts or sharing the troubles or trials that we're going through, but doing it in a respectful and wise way. So let me just ask you, can you give us like a practical example of how this might play out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I talked about the one, when I was preaching and just, kind of outlined a marriage moment. And what's great about that moment for me is that compared to most marriage problems, it probably wasn't. I mean, there are people sitting out there who are having affairs, and I'm talking about how something that was seemingly insignificant compared to it, but it was still very authentic, and it was real for me. So I think when the first step probably is just to decide, okay, I agree, authenticity is important.
Right.
Like I agree, like I'm not helping myself or others by pretending to be something I'm not.
Right.
Like nobody's getting better because of that. In fact, we're probably getting a little further from God by doing that. So I'm going to commit to being real. That's step one. Step two, though, is how am I going to do that? I think that maybe you're in a community group, you're in a group of friends, you're with other believers. I don't think it's just walking in going, hey, I got to tell you all my junk. I don't think that's it. I think it's being willing to say, hey, I need some help in something. Can I tell you what's going on? It doesn't mean you give every dirty detail. It doesn't mean that you go through every scenario. I think it's just that you're honest about where you're at with it. And you know that you're okay with God.
Right.
But you're allowing other people to maybe be his megaphone into your life to help
you're
lead
struggling
you in
with it, and you may not feel like you're okay with God,
That's right.
but just trying to help with that.
Yeah.
And I would like to go a step further and just say, I think that it's important as Christians that when somebody does that we not leap to judgment.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That we support people and say, thanks for sharing that. And I've struggled with something similar, and it's important that you were talking about this and just really affirming their desire to talk about it, because that allows everyone
This is advice we give to middle school parents and high school parents. It's like, freak out on the inside, calm on the outside, right?
Yeah.
So as a Christian, when people are being vulnerable, I think it's great advice.
I think that's great. What was it again? Freak out?
Freak out on the inside, calm on the outside. Listen, process, don't judge.
And come back and watch right now. That's the best part.